Good morning and welcome to Delicious by Debbie. I have been asked, ever since I started videoing my recipes, I have been asked so many times, when are you going to do a pie? When are you going to do a pie? Pies are kind of my thing. And for some reason, a lot of women and men both are intimidated by making pie crust. I guess I never have been because I started making pie crust with my mother probably when I was about 8 years old, and pies are kind of my thing. And I make a lot of. I decided today that we would do an apple pie, and it really is not as hard to make the crust and everything as you might think. So hopefully once we get through with this video, you will be convinced also that you can make a pie. And I'm cutting up my apples right now. I'm making an apple pie. So far I have that many cut up. I'm using Macintosh apples today. And I just got these at a local grocery store. Macintosh, and I like the Macintosh. They're not very big, but they are a nice apple for making pies with. So I'm using those. Now some people have a measurement of how many cups. My mother-in-law always told me that a gauge to go by was to use 3 cups of fruit for whatever kind of pie you're making, whether it's apple, cherry, blueberry, you name it, that you should use 3 cups of fruit. I use just a little bit more than that. I like mine to have a little more fruit than that, and I like to be a nice full pie. And one of the things I've always really been fussy about when I make an apple pie is I don't like it when the core, the little, I call them bees wings of the core, are left in there. So I make sure, I probably waste some apple because I like to make sure that I don't have any of that left there. There's nothing worse than biting down on a piece of apple pie and having pieces of the core around the seeds. See, I dig it clear out. I make sure I get it out of there. I don't want that in there. I like to get just a bite of apple and not have. So you can see there that there's still some in there. So I'm going to cut that completely out, even if it takes a little bit more of the apple than normal, because I don't like to have that in there. All right, we've got our apples. We have 4 cups. I'm using 4 cups of apples today, and I have them all sliced up. Here's about the thickness. I don't like them real thick. I want them to cook up good. And so we're going to get those seasoned and sugared and let them sit while we do the pie crust. And in my fruit pies, unless it's something very tart, unless they would be like a very tart apple or black raspberry, the gauge that I go by is 1.5 cups of sugar for the fruit. So we'll get us 1.5 cups of sugar. All right. And I like to use 3 heaping spoonfuls of flour. I can't really say that's 3 tablespoons because I believe it would be even more than that. But I like to get 3 heaping spoonfuls. I'm talking big spoonfuls, and I'm using a serving spoon, not a teaspoon. This would be like a serving spoon. And I use 3 of those. 1, 2, 3. And I like to use some cinnamon in my apple pies. Some people use nutmeg. My mother always used nutmeg. I never cared for the flavor of it in apple pie, and neither does my husband, so I don't use it. So I use a teaspoon of cinnamon. So we've got the apples, 1.5 cups of sugar, 3 big spoonfuls of flour, and a teaspoon of cinnamon. And I just stir that all up, and I'm going to let this sit while we make the crust. And the longer it sits, the more it absorbs some of that sugar, and the apples make the sugar moist, and it all mixed together real nice before you even put it in the pie crust. So we're going to mix this all up. Let's go ahead and get started on our pie crust. And this isn't difficult. So you just practice is what makes it work. All right, a gauge to go by that I go by, and this is really Crisco's recipe. I use King Arthur flour. That makes the best pastries, and I use the butter flavored Crisco. To me, that makes the nicest pie crust. It's what I've used for years, and it works. So first of all, since we're making a 2-crust pie, we're gonna want 2 cups of flour. If I was only doing a 1 crust, I would just use 1 cup. But since I'm doing a 2 crust, I'm gonna go ahead and do 2 cups of flour. And what we wanna do is spoon it into the cup. Don't just put the cup in there and dip it up. Spoon it into the cup and then level it off. So there's 1 cup. And there's 2 cups. And to that, we are going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And we want, if you were doing a 1-crust pie, you would use 1/3 cup of Crisco, but since we're doing a 2-crust pie, we want 2/3 of a cup. And just a little trick, I spray my cup. You know how shortening just sticks so bad to a cup. So I spray it with cooking spray, and it makes it so much easier to get it out of the measuring cup. So this is a 1/3 measuring cup, so I need 2/3. All right, there's 1/3. Just push it down in there. Doesn't have to be perfectly level. 2/3. And because I sprayed my cup, it's going to be much easier to clean. And then I'm going to use a pastry blender. I have a couple of these and they're getting really old. I've used them for a good many years. And we just want to cut the shortening into the flour and salt mixture until it's pretty fine. I like mine to be really fine. I don't like great big chunks of shortening. It seems to make a nicer, flakier crust if you really get it blended up good. I'm just blending that in there with the pastry blender, getting all the big chunks of it blended up with the flour. All right, as you can see, that's pretty fine. Then I have some very cold ice water. I keep it in the refrigerator so that I have it ready. And I start out with 5 tablespoons. Now, because I'm making a 2-crust pie, I'm obviously going to need more, but I start out with 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to start out with 5 tablespoons of ice water, and then I'm going to cut that into it with my spoon. All right, I have those 5 mixed in. I'm going to do 3 more. I'm not going to do a full 5 until I see if I need it. 1, 2, 3. It's coming together nicely. Hopefully you can see that. I don't want to put too much water in it. I don't want it sticky, but I want enough water that I can roll it, put it together in a bowl and roll it out. Okay, I'm going to put 2 more. That will be exactly 10 tablespoons. And that's what you're supposed to use for a 2-crust pie. It looks like we're going to be right on today. For some reason, some days I need a little bit more or not quite as much, but this is doing nice today. right, there we are. It has come together nicely, has formed a nice ball of dough. That would be enough for 2 crusts, a bottom crust and a top crust. I'm going to give our apples another stir. They're starting to let some of the liquid, the juice from the apples release because of the sugar in it, and it's bringing it together nicely so that when we're ready to pour it into our pie shell, most of the sugar will be already mixed in. As you can see, it's doing nicely. All right, I put some flour on my board here. I'm not sure if this board's gonna work or not. I tried to use it so that because my counters are such a light color, I wanted it to show up so you could see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna put the dough out onto this cutting board on some flour and just mix it a little bit, knead it a little bit. Don't wanna handle your dough too much or it won't be nice and flaky. That's enough right there. So I'm gonna divide this in half. And I'm going to use this half as our bottom crust. So I have floured the board. I'm going to flour my rolling pin. We're going to roll this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this because this cutting board doesn't want to stay where I have it, but it might work. All right, want some more flour on it so that my rolling pin doesn't stick to it. And we're just going to roll this so that it'll fit in this 9-inch pie dish. See how nicely that's staying together? And a good gauge to go by to know if you're making it big enough is to take your pie dish and put it down on there, and if you've got some to spare around the edges, you're going to be okay. Now I know you can buy mats that have it measured out exactly for 9-inch and 8-inch. I don't have those. I had one years ago, a Tupperware one, and it literally had it so long it got brittle. All right, now we're going to put this into our pie dish. There are times, I'll just tell you, that your dough will break, it will tear, and that's okay. You can piece it together, you can pinch it together and make it work. There. We've got our bottom crust. I'm going to go ahead and roll out the top crust before we put the apples into the pie dish. And here's the other half. So this will be our top crust. And it helps if you go ahead and kind of form it into a nice circle before you even start rolling. Now you don't have your pie dish to measure with this one, so you're just going to have to kind of eyeball it. I think that's good. I think that's going to be perfect. We're ready to put the apples. They're all mixed up nicely with the cinnamon and the sugar and the flour. Some people mix theirs all up, put it in a pan and cook it on top of the stove so that it thickens, and that's fine. I believe my mother-in-law used to do that, but I don't do that except for like black raspberry. I have them frozen, and so I do put those in a pan and thicken them on the stove beforehand, but I don't apple pie. All right, there we are. Got all the apples in there. And I also take some butter, a stick of butter, and I will cut off 5 pieces of this butter, not a whole tablespoon. It would probably be more like a half of a tablespoon. I know these are measured into tablespoon increments on the paper, but I take 5, 4 around the edges, just about this thick. And there's something about the butter mixing with the apples and the sugar and everything just makes it really, really nice. All right, there you go. All 5 of them are on there. Now it's time to put the top crust on. So we're going to put it onto the rolling pin and bring it over here and lay it on top. And if it's not right where you want it, you can move it. Should be pretty pliable. And I just kind of press it a little bit. Then I'm going to go around the edge, and I don't want it, hopefully you can see this. I don't want that much hanging over to have to fold down in. It makes too thick of a crust around the edge. So I tear some of that off. Now, if my boys were still here, they would want me to take this that I tear off and roll it out again and put cinnamon and sugar on it and bake it like a little cinnamon roll. Or one of my sons, I won't tell you which one of my sons likes to take the dough and eat it raw, which to me is gross. But anyway, all right, now that we've got that all pretty well measured, then we're just going to start taking the 2 pieces, the bottom one and the top one, together and turn them down in, go clear all around the crust, taking those 2 together and putting them down under and pressing them along the edge. Hope you can see me doing this. I'm taking some extra crust from the bottom crust off so it's not too thick. Hopefully you can see this. I'm just taking the 2 crusts together, and I kind of pinch them together a little bit, and then I turn them down in. Pinch them together, turn them down in. I'm going to go clear around the edge of the pie. That seals the edges so that none of the juice of the pie bakes out around the edges and comes down in the oven. Is that foolproof? No, because some pies, especially with fresh fruits, will sometimes still leak out. And the fact that I put 4 cups of fruit instead of 3 makes it more possible that it could leak out. But usually my apple pies do not. So I pinch those together, I'll turn it down under. All right, so you can see the edges. I've just turned them down under, pinched them together and turned them down under. All right, and now I'm going to crimp the sides, and I take these 2 fingers and this finger, and I pinch the dough and push it with this finger. And I'll go all around the edge of this pie doing this. You can do whatever you want to with the edges. You don't even have to do this. You could leave it just the way we had it without the edges, but I like to do this to the edges. Some people take the extra dough, like I have here, and they would roll it out, and they have little cutters that are leaves or whatever, and they'll put those along the edge and press those down, and that's perfectly fine too. I've done that before, but today we're just doing this. There we go. That's our pie. Isn't that pretty? And it's an apple pie, and you have to cut some slits in the top so that the liquid and steam can come out so it doesn't boil over. So since it's an apple pie, I like to cut an A into the middle of it. I don't always get it in the middle. And then I cut 4 other slits. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. All right, and in Amish country, I buy white sanding sugar. And my husband likes it if I put some of this on top before I bake it. So we're going to do that today. Some people like to put egg or milk or something on their crust, but mine browns up okay without it. So there we are. Our pie is ready for the oven. Isn't that nice? So I'm going to bake this at 350 for 30 minutes, and then I will take a fork after 30 minutes, and I will go into one of these slits or into the A, and I will just make sure that the apples are not real hard, that they're cooked up enough that they're not hard to eat. So we're going to go ahead and put this in the oven at 350. And there is our finished pie. Too hot to cut it, but it baked beautifully. The apples are just perfectly done inside. So it's really not that hard. Once I get it cut, I'll let you see it then. So here's our finished pie. I got a little anxious and I cut it before I should have, so it's still warm. A little bit runny, like, because it's so warm. But I still wanted to cut it before I finish this video and let you see what it looks like. That's good. Very good. Those apples cooked up perfectly. They're not hard at all, but they're not all like applesauce either. They worked up real good. Hope you'll try a pie sometime.